Welcome to Mimir Library, where timeless stories find their voice.
This is Chapter 2 of Waves Between Us by Amir Honarmand. Enjoy.
The cool morning air wrapped around Alara like a familiar embrace as she stood in Tuttley Morning's kitchen, her hands working a large ball of dough with practiced motions. Through the open windows, the gentle rhythm of waves kissing the shore mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed Turkish coffee. The cafe wouldn't open for another hour, and these quiet moments belonged solely to her. Her fingers pressed into the soft dough, feeling it yield and transform beneath her touch. She'd made gozlem thousands of times, the movement so ingrained she could practically do it blindfolded. Usually, this morning ritual centered her, preparing her mind for the day ahead. But today, her thoughts refused to stay anchored to the task. "Focus, Alara," she muttered to herself, adding another sprinkle of flour to the countertop. But even as she spoke, her mind drifted back to yesterday's encounter. The American, Liam, with his wind-swept sandy hair and those startlingly blue eyes that had seemed to take in everything about her cafe with genuine appreciation. There had been something different about him, something beyond the typical tourist's superficial interest. The way he'd noticed the authenticity of Tuttley Mornings when so many visitors only saw it as another beachfront cafe to check off their list. Alara flipped the dough with more force than necessary, sending a small cloud of flour into the air. Why was she even thinking about him? Tourists came and went with the tides. Some were pleasant, some demanding, but all of them temporary, here today, gone tomorrow. Their memories of Antalya fading as they moved on to their next destination. And yet, her hands stilled as she allowed herself to imagine him sitting at one of her tables, perhaps the one by the corner window with the best view of the sea. Would he order the traditional spinach guzleme or be adventurous enough to try her pomegranate and walnut special? Would his eyes crinkle at the corners when he took that first bite? A surprising warmth spread through her chest at the thought, and Alara caught herself smiling at nothing but the half-kneaded dough. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, attacking the dough with renewed vigor. "You don't even know if he'll come back." But he said he would, and something in his expression seemed sincere, not the empty politeness travelers often offer in passing. Lost in her thoughts, Alara's hand slipped, knocking the small ceramic salt container off the counter. It clattered to the floor, spilling white crystals across the tiles. "La Nettelson," she cursed softly, bending down to clean up the mess. An old superstition flickered through her mind. Spilled salt meant a visitor was coming. Her grandmother would have made her throw a pinch over her shoulder to ward off bad luck. As she crouched, gathering the scattered salt with her flour-dusted hands, the small bell above the entrance jingled. She froze, momentarily confused. It was too early for customers, and Celine wasn't due for another 30 minutes. "I'm sorry, we're not open yet," Alara called, still hidden behind the counter. She stood quickly, brushing salt crystals from her palms onto her apron, a professional smile already forming on her lips. Her smile faltered when she looked up. Framed in the doorway, backlit by the golden morning sunlight reflecting off the sea, stood Liam. His tall figure cast a long shadow across the wooden floor of the cafe. He wore faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt, a camera hanging from a strap around his neck. His hair was still slightly damp, as if he'd just emerged from an early morning swim. Their eyes met across the empty cafe, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Alara became fully aware of her messy bun, the flour dusting her cheeks, and the salt scattered at her feet. "I'm early," he said, his voice carrying a note of apology, even as his lips curved into that same genuine smile she had remembered all night. "The guy at my hotel said the morning light here was something special. He wasn't exaggerating." Alara brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, leaving another streak of flour across her cheek without realizing it. Something about his presence made her feel suddenly, inexplicably flustered. "We don't officially open for another hour," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can come back," he offered, already taking a half step backward. "No, I mean, the coffee's already made if you don't mind watching me work." A shy smile of relief touched Liam's lips. "Thank you. I'd like that." Alara turned to the coffee machine, suddenly aware of every movement she made. Her hands felt strangely clumsy as she reached for a cup, pulled the lever, and watched the rich, dark liquid pour in a steaming stream. The familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air between them, but the routine task felt different with him watching. She slid the cup across the polished wooden counter. "Sugar?" "No, thank you. I prefer it black." Liam wrapped his hands around the small cup, his fingers long and tanned against the white ceramic. He took a careful sip, his eyes closing briefly in appreciation. Alara found herself watching his reaction more intently than she normally would with a customer. "Perfect," he murmured, opening his eyes to meet hers. She nodded and turned back to her dough, needing something to occupy her hands. With practiced movements, she shaped another ball, her fingers working the soft, elastic texture. The familiar task helped ground her, though she was aware of his presence at the counter. From the corner of her eye, she could see him watching her work, his gaze thoughtful rather than merely curious. Most tourists who wandered in early stared at their phones or gazed out at the sea while waiting. Liam seemed genuinely interested in the process itself. "You know," he said, his voice breaking the quiet intimacy that had settled between them, "I didn't just come back for the coffee or the breakfast." Alara looked up, her hands stilling on the dough. The intensity in his blue eyes caught her off guard. He leaned slightly against the counter, his gaze sweeping around the small, charming space. "This place, it has a real heartbeat." The specific, thoughtful compliment struck her differently than the usual tourist praise about the cute decor or amazing view. He'd noticed something deeper, something she'd poured her soul into creating. "That's exactly what I wanted, not just another beachfront cafe." He extended a hand over the counter. "I'm Liam O'Connell, by the way." She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron before placing one in his. His grip was firm, his palm slightly calloused against her skin. "Alara Demir." "Well, Alara Demir," Liam said, a new purpose in his tone as he released her hand. "This might sound strange, but I think running into you yesterday was a stroke of luck." He reached into his small bag hanging on his shoulder and pulled out a slim tablet. With a few quick taps, he brought the screen to life and turned it toward her. "I'm a photographer on assignment for Wanderlust magazine." Alara leaned forward to see a stunning portrait of an elderly man surrounded by mounds of golden saffron in what appeared to be a Moroccan marketplace. The colors were vibrant, but it was the dignity and character captured in the merchant's weathered face that made the image remarkable. He swiped to the next photo, a serene temple nestled among misty trees, raindrops creating ripples in a stone garden pool. The composition transformed what could have been a typical tourist shot into something haunting and intimate. "These are beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed by the quality and respect evident in each image. "I'm looking for the soul of Antalya," he continued, his blue eyes earnest and fixed on hers. "Not just another resort photo. After seeing this place," he gestured around the cafe, "I think it might be right here." Alara felt her cheeks warm slightly under his gaze. "Here? At Tatli?" "It's perfect, authentic, local, real." Each word carried weight as he set the tablet down. "I'd like to photograph the cafe, the food, the people who come here, the daily rhythm of the place." Alara's mind raced. The practical side of her recognized the business opportunity. Professional photos would be valuable for the cafe's website and social media. But a more cautious voice whispered warnings about letting a stranger, a foreign tourist who would inevitably leave, into her carefully constructed world. "Why my cafe?" she asked, needing to understand his true interest. "There are dozens along this stretch of coast." "Because most of them are putting on a show," he replied without hesitation. "This place feels lived in, loved.
You can taste the care in the food, see it in how everything is arranged. He paused, running his hand through his sandy hair. Look, I know it sounds like a line, but I've been doing this long enough to recognize when a place has a story worth telling. His sincerity was disarming. Alara looked down at her flour-dusted hands, then back at the man whose unexpected arrival had disrupted her quiet morning routine. There was something compelling about him, something beyond his obvious good looks and charm. "How long would you need?" she asked, not quite a yes, but no longer a definite no. 3 days, maybe 4, just to capture different times of day, different customers. A hopeful smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I promise I won't get in the way." Alara took a deep breath. The flour-dusted counter between them suddenly felt like a boundary between her carefully ordered world and the unpredictable one he represented.
3 days. The words hung in the air between them, stark and loaded with implications Alara hadn't anticipated. She dropped her gaze to the flour-dusted counter, suddenly seeing it as what it was, a white line dividing her carefully controlled world from the unpredictable proposition he represented. For a dizzying moment, she wasn't standing in her cafe in Antalya. She was 2 summers ago, sitting on the beach at sunset, listening to Denise, the painter from Berlin with his dark, soulful eyes and elegant hands, tell her how her authentic life inspired him, how she was his muse, so different from the pretentious art circles he frequented, how he'd captured the essence of her world in his work. Until one morning, she'd woken to find him gone. No note, just an empty space in her bed and an Instagram post of him boarding a flight to Barcelona captioned, "Always moving forward." She'd learned later from a mutual acquaintance that he'd met a gallery owner who'd offered him an exhibition. The memory settled in her stomach like a cold stone. That old hurt whispered its familiar warning, "Don't be foolish again." "Is something wrong?" Liam's voice pulled her back to the present, concern etched across his features. Alara forced herself to look up, to really study his face. She searched his striking blue eyes for the same slick, practiced charm Denise had possessed, the smooth confidence of someone used to getting what they wanted from people before discarding them. But what she found instead was an open, earnest expression. He waited for her answer with the quiet anxiety of someone who genuinely hoped she'd say yes, not the presumption of a man who expected it. His fingers tapped lightly against the counter, a small tell of nervousness that caught her attention. This wasn't Denise, and she wasn't the same woman who'd been so easily swept away. A different feeling rose within her, stronger than the ghost of her past. Pride. She had built this cafe, her sanctuary from the ashes of that heartbreak. She wasn't just a girl with a wounded heart anymore. She was a businesswoman. And this was a good opportunity. Something shifted inside her. She straightened her shoulders, her spine stiffening with resolve. "Okay, Mr. O'Connell," she said, her voice suddenly crisp and professional, surprising even herself. "Here is the deal. You get your 3 days. In exchange, Totley Mornings gets a full, high-resolution digital gallery of your photos, all rights for my own promotional use." Liam's face transformed. A brilliant, relieved smile spread across his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Absolutely. It's a deal." "One more condition," Alara added, a playful glint entering her eyes as she leaned forward slightly. "You said you won't get in the way. If you do, if you slow down my service or bother my customers, you're buying everyone in the cafe a round of my best Goslemet." A sudden, genuine laugh burst from him, a rich, warm sound that filled the quiet cafe. It broke the remaining tension completely. "Ms. Demir," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement, "that is the best deal I've been offered all year." Alara couldn't help smiling back. "Good. Then we understand each other. When should I start?" He glanced around the empty cafe, camera already in his bag.
Tomorrow, 7 a.m., before we open. She gestured to the mess of flour and salt still scattered across the floor. Today, I need to finish my prep work without an audience. 7 it is. Liam nodded, backing toward the door. Thank you for this chance. I promise you won't regret it. As the door closed behind him, Alara let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. What had she just agreed to? 3 days of this man in her space, capturing her world through his lens. 3 days of those blue eyes watching her work. She bent down to finish cleaning the spilled salt, tossing a pinch over her shoulder despite herself. It's just business, she murmured to the empty cafe. Just good business. But as she returned to her dough, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that she'd just opened a door to something entirely unpredictable, something that couldn't be neatly contained within the boundaries of her carefully ordered life.
The story ends here, but the library is always open. Subscribe for more free audiobooks.